This video is brought to you by Squarespace. With advanced worldwide sales of over 2.5 million copies, the Beatles' fourth UK single was the most anticipated in their career so far. It was also the song which topped the Billboard Hot 100 in April 1964, when the Beatles held the top 5 places. I'm Andrew from Parlogram, and welcome to the story of Can't Buy Me Love. Like many of us, the Beatles worked best when they were up against a deadline, and in January 1964, they had a few big ones. Not only did they need to come up with an album's worth of songs for their forthcoming film, they also needed a follow-up to I Want to Hold Your Hand, which had now reached the #1 spot on both sides of the Atlantic. Fortunately, being holed up in a room at the luxury Georges V Hotel in Paris for a couple of weeks meant that they were relatively free from distractions. And to aid them further in their task, a piano was installed in their room as they began work on their most eagerly awaited song yet. Back then, as now I suppose, it was the norm in the pop world that once you'd struck gold and found a winning formula, it was expected that you just rinse and repeat it as many times as you could. But the Beatles were different and always wanted to move forward and never repeat themselves. Fancying themselves as the new Rodgers and Hammerstein, Paul and John, Paul especially, was keen to broaden his songwriting style, and now seemed to be the perfect time to get sophisticated. This Harry Benson photo from a cutting from the Daily Express on January 31st, 1964, shows John and Paul at the piano in their Paris hotel room, with George and Ringo adding their support in the background. And as Can't Buy Me Love was written on the piano, this photo could have captured the exact moment of its creation. In his recent book The Lyrics, Paul explains the song's interesting chord structure. It's a 12-bar blues with a Beatles twist on the chorus, where we bring in a couple of minor chords. Usually minor chords are used in the verse of a song, and major chords bring a lift and lighten the mood in the chorus. We did it the other way round here. With the song now written, the Beatles went along to EMI France's Pathé Marconi studios. But the first order of the day was to record the German-language versions of She Loves You and I Want to Hold Your Hand. I Want to Hold Your Hand, or Komm Gib mir deine Hand, was performed to the original backing track, which had been brought over by George Martin from Abbey Road. That task was made easier due to the fact that the song had originally been recorded onto a 4-track machine. But She Loves You had been recorded on twin-track only, and because the session tape had already disappeared, the Beatles had to record the song from scratch in the studio that day. But having performed it so many times on stage since, it wasn't a difficult task and was completed quickly in 14 takes. This then left time for the group to begin recording Can't Buy Me Love, of which 4 takes were attempted. Take 2 was presented on Anthology 1, which revealed John and George's backing vocals, which were later left out of the song's arrangement. Now, a highlight on the finished track is George's first big guitar solo on a Beatles single, but at the time of the Paris recording, he was yet to perfect it. The Anthology version flew in his rudimentary solo from take 1 and remixed that version to mono to sound similar to the finished single. However, I prefer the dry stereo version, which still exists.
Can't buy me love, love, can't buy me love.
3 days after their return from America, the Beatles reconvened at Abbey Road to complete the recording of both sides of their next single. Work they'd done on the song in Paris meant that Can't Buy Me Love was completed fairly quickly and needed only a new vocal from Paul and George's now refined guitar solo. However, you can still hear the ghost of his initial efforts bleed through on the master from the Paris backing track. The next job of the day was to record the B-side of the single, John's You Can't Do That. You Can't Do That had been written in Miami and was completed in 9 takes during that 10 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. session. Both tracks were then mixed into mono for the single during a 3-hour session the following day. But there was a problem. For some technical reason, possibly due to some damage on the Paris tape, Ringo's hi-hat cymbal had dropouts which needed filling in. But as Ringo was busy that day, filming his sequence in the Turk's Head pub in Twickenham, he clearly wasn't going to be able to fix it himself, and time was of the essence. So it's rumoured that engineer Norman Smith was left to overdub the hi-hat work onto the mono mix. Now, the difference in the sound of the hi-hat between the mono and stereo mixes is easy to hear, with it being much more prominent in the mono mix. Can't Buy Me Love was the most eagerly anticipated single of their career, and in the week before its release, it had combined advance orders in Britain and America of 2.5 million. Capitol had originally planned to release Roll Over Beethoven as their next single, but cancelled it as it was not considered to be typical of the Beatles' current sound. The first chance British fans got to hear the new single was on Saturday, March the 14th, on the TV shows Jukebox Jury and Thank Your Lucky Stars. If you're considering setting up a business online, this video sponsor Squarespace can help you make it happen. Websites are not just for selling physical goods. Why not take your knowledge and skills and turn them into income with Squarespace courses? Squarespace's award-winning stylish templates make it easy to find a layout that perfectly matches your brand. Then, upload your videos and organize your video library with the aid of their next-generation Fluid Engine drag-and-drop system. Once you have created lessons your audience will love, simply add a paywall to your site and set the prices. You can charge a one-time fee or sell subscriptions. Squarespace's powerful payment tools enable you to create a seamless checkout experience by accepting credit cards, PayPal, Apple Pay, and, where enabled, the option to buy now and pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay. Want to find out more? Then head on over to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/parlogram to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Such was the mania for the group at that time, anything the Beatles put out would have been a huge success. And that inevitability wasn't lost in the reviews of the single in the UK press. Jane Gaskill, a young journalist employed by the Daily Express, whose intelligent review of With the Beatles we featured in our video about that album a few months ago, wrote this of the single a week before its release. The Beatles haven't been at number one since Dave Clark knocked them off in the first week of January. In fact, they haven't been in the top 20 since February 21st. Out next week, the new Beatles single. Has it been worth the wait? Contradicting their famous Money lyrics, the Beatles claim now that love is worth more than loot. For the Beatles, this is a rather mellow idea. More, it's a cliché. For my own money, the B-side is better. Titled You Can't Do That, it's a harsh demand, full of the anguish proper to a lover being set aside, but also too dynamic to be called a plea. Neither side is particularly exciting, but of course, no such consideration will keep it out of number one place. And Don Nickel wrote this in Disc. Can't Buy Me Love is a large noise, a thumping good side, with Paul leading the vocal on a forceful chant. The guitar sound using George's 12-string lead is exciting and often new. There is one short burst of screaming, but none of the old trademark of falsetto oohs and yeah-yeahs, which is probably wise. John Lennon's singing on the middle-paced You Can't Do That achieves a rough quality that is interesting, though the song itself isn't quite up to the usual songwriting standard of Paul and himself. One of the penalties of success is that people will be watching for the group to falter, but there's no sign of it here, so it's Lookout 30, here they come again. The reviewer from Record Mirror was, however, less than impressed and seemed grudgingly resigned to its success. I don't care too much for money, sing the Beatles. Haha. With million-plus orders on this medium-paced single, they don't have to. Not their best disc, but the backing is probably the best for them for a long while. It builds up into a climax and is totally different from their previous sides. Catchy, commercial, the Beatles. Nothing more need to be said. Flip is another from the prolific pens of Messrs L and M. Bluesy, well performed, and we preferred it to side one. So it seems the reviewers preferred the B-side. But what's the story behind that song? Unlike Paul's songs, John's had an autobiographical nature to them, and You Can't Do That was clearly one of them. John's possessiveness of the women in his life has been well documented in various biographies of his life, and his jealous tendencies can be found in songs like Run for Your Life and, of course, Jealous Guy from Imagine. You Can't Do That was the first of his songs on this theme, which he embellishes by playing the terrific rhythm guitar solo himself. The song comes across as much more honest and emotional than McCartney's A-side, and, as we've just heard, was one the reviewers, and I personally, prefer. American fans got their hands on the single 4 days before the British on March the 16th, where it sold 2 million copies in a week. Although Can't Buy Me Love hit the number one spot in the UK on April the 2nd, its chart statistics were eclipsed by events stateside. Such was the demand for the single in the States, the Capitol had to contract RCA, Savoy and Decca to help press up additional copies. The Savoy plant even pressed a few unauthorised copies of this single on yellow and black vinyl, as well as just yellow vinyl. These are unsurprisingly extremely valuable, with the last one selling in March 2022 for $27,500. Even the regular picture sleeve, which, due to limited distribution on the East Coast only, is the rarest and most valuable of all the Beatles' Capitol single covers, with near-mint examples easily fetching $1,000. On April the 4th, 1964, the Billboard Hot 100 belonged to the Beatles. That week, they held the top 5 positions, with Please Please Me at number 5, I Want to Hold Your Hand at number 4, the previous week's number 1 She Loves You at number 3, Twist and Shout on Tolly at number 2, and their second Capitol single Can't Buy Me Love at number 1. Not only did they hold the top 5 places, they had 7 other records in the chart, which were joined a week later by 2 more, There's a Place and Love Me Do. This incredible feat has never been equalled since, and with the way the charts are calculated today, it's a record which will never be broken. But not everybody was happy with this new British invasion. This article from the Record Mirror the following week, entitled The American Beatle Haters, told how executives from other US record companies were complaining that the Beatles were bad for business. From the moment I Want to Hold Your Hand hit the number 1 place, any disc not stamped Beatles felt the pinch. One top disc man reports, the Beatles saturated airtime. Some stations couldn't find the time to plug more than a handful of our new releases, so the only thing we could do was not release anything remotely like Beatle music. And record dealers too were also feeling the negative effect of Beatlemania. One said pointedly, we could do huge business on Beatle discs, but nobody seemed interested in anything else. Sales on some of the established big sellers have been way down in the past month. Some stores, on the theory if you can't beat 'em, join 'em, turned over all available space to Beatles pictures and promotion ideas. Other releases were just tucked away in back rooms, unwanted and forgotten. But of course, it wasn't all bad news. Cashbox pointed to the positives, saying that, quote, for some stations concentrating on good music, they keep off rock and R&B, we're getting larger audiences, mostly listeners who couldn't stand the non-stop Beatle hammering on other programs. Signs were also evident that good music radio stations during the past 2 weeks were playing a great part in the success of hit singles. Listeners who preferred to sit out the great exposure of the Beatles' dates on top 40 outlets had evidently helped put over such a good music side as Hello Dolly by Louis Armstrong, his first single smash in years. One person who certainly wasn't complaining was the ever-modest Jerry Lee Lewis. In this article written for Disc at the end of March, he claimed that thanks to the Beatles breathing new life into rock and roll, he was now selling more records than ever. Can't Buy Me Love and its B-side You Can't Do That both appeared on the Hard Day's Night album in the UK that July, but those same tracks appeared on 2 different albums in the States. Can't Buy Me Love was hijacked by United Artists for their film soundtrack album, while You Can't Do That found a home on the Beatles' second album. Can't Buy Me Love did appear on this Odd Capital compilation album in August 1964, both in mono and a truly horrible rechanneled stereo mix. American fans had to wait until February 1970 for the Hey Jude album to get a true stereo mix. Can't Buy Me Love was performed at both the 1964 and 1965 Hollywood Bowl concerts, with the 1965 performance being chosen for release on the 1977 album, although the expanded 2016 album also included You Can't Do That. It was also performed at the 1965 Shea Stadium concert, before being retired after their final show of that tour at the Cow Palace Theatre in San Francisco on August the 31st. The group returned to it one final time in January 1966, when they overdubbed elements for the Shea Stadium film, which was broadcast on the BBC on March the 1st, 1966. It's a song Paul McCartney has played live many times over the years, but for me, the definitive version is the one in the Hard Day's Night film, which is triggered anytime I hear anyone shout, "We're out." But what are your feelings about this single? Do share your thoughts and memories about it with me and everyone else in the comments. I really hope you enjoyed this video and that you'll stay tuned for some very special content coming up on the channel over the next few weeks. So make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of them. I guarantee you won't be disappointed. In the meantime, a big thank you to everyone who subscribed to the channel over the past few weeks, especially to those of you who have become channel members or joined us over on Patreon, because it's your support that keeps this channel going. But right now, I'm done with this one. So all that's left to say is bye for now, and thanks for watching.